What's up, gang? Welcome to Art at Home session number 14, and we are moving on to the next principle of art, which is space. Space is it's not a difficult thing to do, because in pretty much all the pictures that we've been drawing and all the things we've been creating, there has been a sense of space, whether it be measuring or moving things around. So pictures usually use that element without even you thinking about it, but it's a little bit difficult to come up with an idea for space, something that's interesting anyway and everyone can do. So I wanted to share this one with you guys because I noticed that when we were working yesterday, we were working on pictures that may have been a little bit difficult for some of you. If you guys were doing a photograph of a family member or yourself, it might have been kind of difficult for you to kind of get the proportions on the different parts of the face. So I want to show you guys today how to make it a little bit easier by using space on a picture, on a photograph. Okay, so what we're going to need today is we are going to need our eraser, our pencil, and a ruler, as well as a photograph. So I have all my materials here. Oh, we need one more thing. Paper, so we can draw. So I have all my materials here that we'll be working with today. I want to just show you something that's going to help us to draw. Say we have a picture of a person, and I don't even know where to begin. I'm looking at the picture. Okay, I'm thinking back on all the art classes that we had together, and I'm like, okay, well, Mr. D says find a point on the photo or on the picture somewhere, block in negative shapes or shapes of the face, head, neck, body, whatever you're trying to draw, and try to make it work. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. You're like looking at it, you're just like, whoa, this is a little bit too much detail. My brain is not making it work. So I want to show you guys a little trick using space to simplify the photograph, not by changing it in any way, but just by adding something to it. Now this is what I'm going to do. We're going to use our ruler, and we are going to put lines going across our picture, and the lines are going to be horizontal as well as vertical. Alright, and these lines are going to create a grid. Alright, so let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to measure out lines cutting across this picture. Now if you look at this picture, it's a very strange picture because it's square. Most pictures are rectangular in shape, so it's either wider or taller, but for some strange reason this picture is a square. So the picture, the paper that I'm using to draw on is a rectangle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it like a rectangle. So some of my measurement might come off the edges, and it might be cropping in some of the sides of my picture to make it a little slimmer, to give it that rectangular look. So I'm going to go ahead and put my ruler down and measure across, and it's 5 1/4 inches, and vertically it's the same. So this is a square. All right. What I want to do is I want to make a grid of 4 by 3, so 4 squares high by 3 squares wide. So if I look at the picture and where I want to cut it off at, I just want to catch the face of the person. So I'm going to measure my ruler until where the face kind of matches up with the base, and I notice it lands by 4 3/4 inches. So what I can do is I can move it over slightly to make it 4 1/2 inches. That way each one of my squares on my grid will be 1 1/2 inches all the way around. Okay, so if I choose 1 1/2 inches and I move my ruler here and say I want to make 4 horizontal lines, I have to figure, okay, 1 1/2 inches, that's one grid. 1 1/2 inches, that's 2. 1 1/2 inches, that's 3. 1 1/2 inches, that's okay. So mix up to the 6-inch mark. So I'm gonna have all this space on the bottom is gonna be white. But what I can do is I can move it so that the top shares some of that burden with the bottom, so that there's both a cropping, a white cropping on the top and the bottom of my picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the bottom again, the width of my picture, and I'm going to do an 1.5 inch measurement. Okay, so lining up my ruler with the base of my picture, I put the 1/2 inch mark all the way towards the end. That's good enough. And then I take my pencil, I mark the 0, I mark the 1.5 inch, I mark the 3, and I mark, well, the very edge you don't really need to mark, but I'll just mark it anyway just in case you guys have a different type of photo. Okay, so then I turn my photo upside down, and once again I line up my picture, putting the 0 all the way to the corner of my picture. I'm just gonna put a mark there. Then I go 1.5 inch, that's my second mark, 1.5 inch, third mark, 1.5 inch, that's my fourth mark. Alright, so now I have all 4 of my marks. I have 1, 2, 3, and then the edge here, 4. Right, so now I'm able to measure it. Since I put the dots horizontally on the bottom and the top of my picture, now I have 2 points that I can meet so that I can draw a straight line going up to the very top. And here I wanted to make 4 squares in separation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it right in the middle. I'm going to go 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch, yeah. Alright, so I'm going to do my measurements here. Line goes all the way up to the 6. Come back in. Okay, so now I can draw my line on the bottom. Like this. Turn my picture over. Now it's a little bit hard for me to measure this and keep it in the frame, only because I don't want my head blocking the way. But I mean, either way, you're not able to see it because my head is either going to block the way or you're not going to see it because it's off the page. Alright, so let's go ahead and from here measure out the rest of the marks we made. And we're going to go right, oops, through the picture. And hang on, I got a phone call. Hello? I don't know, hang on. Alright, so getting back to it. Alright, so you see that I've got these bars going right down the face of my character. Now I need to go ahead and mark the back, the outside, the left and the right side, going across. And it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to see on this side because this side is completely dark. It's really hard to see. But I know that I'm doing a 1.5 inch mark, half and okay, and I only need to put 3 marks because the 2 last marks are already done already. Okay, so I can even double check it. Yeah, they line up pretty well. Okay, there's my first mark, my second mark, and my third mark. I'm just going to go ahead and match those up to each other. Line them up and put a mark. Both sides. Okay, so there we have a picture that has been gridded. You're probably wondering, what is the point of all this work? Why am I gridding this paper? I'm going to show you. If you would like, you can take your scissors and you can cut along the outside of your grid. That way you don't have to worry about all this other noise on top of your paper, and you can just focus on the grid. Okay, so this is rubbish. Make sure that you throw your garbage away. And now I have myself a photograph that has been evenly gridded so that it can help me with my drawing. I'm going to show you what to do next on your paper. Okay, so here's my paper that I'm going to be drawing this picture here. Okay, and it doesn't have to be a paper. Maybe you guys will be one day doing art murals or on the sides of buildings or whatever. This is a huge help if you grid out how big you want your picture to go on the wall, and reduce that size to the size of your paper here. So let me show you how to do that. So this paper is much bigger than this cutout piece of photograph here. And I'm going to create equal size squares on this paper, and I'm going to show you the next step after. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have a grid of 4 by 1, 2, 3 by 3. So I need to make an even group of 3 squares by 4 squares on this paper. So I'm going to quickly grab my ruler. This is going to take a little bit of math, and I'm going to measure it. And right off the bat, I can see the length of my paper, or the height of my paper, is exactly 12 inches. Okay, so if I'm going to put squares of 4 going down, at the very most, my squares can be approximately 3 inches tall, because I can get 3, 6, 9, 12. I can get 4 squares going up at 3 inches thick, but we have to make sure that there's enough room for a 3-inch wide square on the bottom or the top. Okay, so I need to take my ruler and I need to line up my ruler with the bottom of my paper, and sure enough, there's 9 inches wide, which means that if I use a 3-inch square grid, I'll have enough to make 3, 6, 9, 12, a 12-inch grid using 4 3-inch squares going down, and it says here that I can do 3 3-inch wide squares going across. So this is perfect. This paper actually suits the needs that I have. Okay, so I'm just going to put a mark on the 3-inch, on the 6-inch, and the 9-inch is already. We already know that's the end of the paper. So now we can turn the paper over and measure the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to do the 3-inch, the 6-inch, and once again the 9-inch is already taken. Grab my ruler, put it across from mark to mark, and I'm going to lightly make a line going down. I don't want to go too dark, but I am going to go dark enough so that you guys can see it on the screen. The reason why you don't want to go too dark is because this is going to be your finished picture. And if you have a really dark line going through the face of your drawing, that's going to kind of make it look not so good. So draw your line light enough for you to see, or dark enough for you to see, but light enough for you to erase. Okay? So I'm going to draw mine a little bit darker so that you guys can actually see the lines on my paper. So I have the 2 vertical lines right now. That's finished. And now I have to measure the side of my paper going across. So it's going to be another 3 inches. So I put a mark on the 3, on the 6, and on the 9, because the 12 inches at the very end of my ruler. Turn my paper around, measure it again. Put mark on the 3, the 6, the 9. Alright. Take my ruler now and I connect those 2 points that we just drew. I'm going to use the bottom of my ruler because it's really hard to see the other side of the ruler unless I use the camera, which is very awkward. Okay. So draw another line going across that I can see. So there's our first line. It's created the first 3 squares. I can see this one a little bit better. So I'm just going to go ahead and line that up. And the last group of squares. Go ahead and do that. Alright, so this is it. This was our project today. And that was creating a grid so that we would have an easier time drawing a more difficult photograph or picture that has lots of elements in it, too much for you guys to really understand. Now, that's not the end of the video, but that is basically the end of the project of trying to organize your work using the space that you have to create a drawing that is on a bigger surface. Like I said, if you guys are going to do a drawing on top of a building or whatever, if you grid the building with the squares being the same ratio as the squares on your photograph, it should come out pretty precise. So I realized that these squares on top here is 1.5 inches, whereas these are 3 inches. So this paper is actually double the size of the photograph, which is pretty neat. So I'd be able to fit 4 of these pictures in this one piece of paper. That's pretty cool. Okay, but anyway, so now what you do with the grids, what you do is, if you look, say at this very first grid, imagine that this is the picture that you're drawing today. Not this whole big picture, just this small section right at the top here. You're going to notice that there's a white line cutting across the top. Then you're going to notice that there's some fuzzy lining over here. It's light on one side, like values that we did yesterday. It's light on one side and it's dark on the other with a few stripes or a few little lines of light coming through it. This is what we're focusing on. That's it. So when you're drawing, you are going to copy these same details inside the square, but you want this to be blown up to match this. You have to double the size. If your measurements are like mine, where your paper, your photograph is half the size of your paper, where your paper is double the size of your photograph, you have to increase the size of whatever marks you're seeing in here. When you draw them, you have to increase the size of those things. So what I usually do is, when I look at a grid like this, I try to imagine, well, where's halfway between my square? And if I put a point right in the center of my square, like if I have this imaginary dot in my mind, and this is where the center is, and then from here I have an idea of where I can move around to add my detail. Like okay, so here's the middle of my square, and then I notice, wow, halfway between the middle of my square and the end of my line is where the hair line is. So that is a good way to find reference so that your proportions can work out for you. Same with the center of the line to the end of our photo. The end of my photo here ends halfway between the middle of the square and the top of the square. That's where it ends. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure that out already, because that's pretty obvious. So if I put my ruler here and I measure out halfway of 3, which is 1.5 inches, and then I'm like, okay, well, halfway between the middle of my square and the top of my square is where that white line is. What is a half of 1.5? Does anybody know? What is it, 3/4 of an inch? Okay, so I'm gonna go 3/4 of an inch, and this group right here is 1/4 of an inch. Quarter, quarter, quarter. So I'm gonna measure here. There's my quarter. I'm gonna move my ruler down because my line goes across the entire thing. So I'm gonna kill 1, 2, 3 birds with just one line. And I'm gonna mark my quarter, 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 and mark another line there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw, using those 2 marks, I'm gonna draw a nice solid line going across 3 of my blocks. And now I know I am not drawing anything in any of these boxes because this is all blank. You can continue the same thing off to the bottom, but you know what, I'm gonna hold off because my hand does scrub a lot when I'm drawing on the paper, and I don't want to like smudge all these graphite lines everywhere. So I'm gonna hold off on that until I get to the bottom. But basically, the top of the paper stays white, so I block that off. That's done. Now all I have to do is I have to focus in on one square, draw what I see in that one square inside the bigger square, move to the middle. Wow, there's even less detail here. This is pretty much all a light value with a little bit of shadowing at the top. So that's just a very easy block. All I do is put a little bit of shadow right at the top here, and that's it. Maybe give it a middle tone because the skin is darker than the paper. And then finally, the last one has this line coming down, starting from the middle of the square, and it comes down, moving more towards the left side of the square. It gets fuzzy where the hair is, and then the rest is dark, and this part is a little bit more shaded, a little bit more value, darker value than the middle of the forehead. We got some shadows here on the left side of the forehead. You see that? So that's when I'd start putting a little bit more grays. All right. After you're done with that, you move to the next section. Eyeball, eyeball, ear. Move on to the next section. Cheek, nose, mouth, cheek. The bottom section, left jaw, chin, right side of the neck. And you're done. Just take it block at a time. Block at a time. This is smaller chunks of information for you to look at. It's less confusing. Looking at this information here is way easier than looking at a huge picture like that. So this is simplifying what you're looking at, you know, only looking at what you need to look at the time when you're drawing it. You don't have to go ahead and like, oh my gosh, I have to draw this face. No, you're just looking at that one spot, and then when that spot is done, you're looking at that spot there, and once that is done, then you're looking at the spot right there, and so on and so forth. You keep blocking things out so that you don't get overwhelmed. Yeah? How many ways can I move my hand? Anyway, so that's the idea. So with that information, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna draw the picture here, fast forward, fast time speed, and then you guys can see what I'm doing, what I mean by transferring this small square into this bigger square, okay? Okay, that's it for our session today. All you have to do is finish up by grabbing your eraser and just going over the little grid lines on your picture to get those off of your the face or whatever you're drawing, whatever kind of photo you're making. Use those grids. It's going to help you to see the pictures easier, or see the photograph that you choose easier, because it starts to block off these smaller shapes and you can take it off in little bites instead of looking at the entire thing and being overwhelmed at one time. So yeah, use your eraser, take off all those grid lines from your drawing. That way it doesn't like ruin your picture. And next time, go lighter. As long as you can see the grid lines and where they're supposed to be, you can go ahead and fill in all those little spots. So we'll see you tomorrow, Aloha Friday. Have a good one.